All right. So bit of technical difficulties, but thank you for coming on the show.
Pushing through it every time.
Yeah.
No mountain we can't. Yeah.
All right. To begin the interview, the ADP Center, how does that merge technology and education?
So the ADP Center for Learning Technologies was kind of created out of this idea that we needed to figure out how to integrate technology into teaching, learning, and research, specifically within the College of Education and Human Services. So how exactly do we do that? It's kind of calendar, it's a combination of things, right? It's a calendar of professional development where we're teaching different technology tools and applications and running these like hands-on interactive discovery sessions where you're learning in an environment where me and my team are there to kind of help facilitate the transition, because learning something new is scary. As we just saw, technology is not always, the most friendly.
Yeah, not always on our side.
So it's trying to, create this environment where we're facilitating failure-free learning. So that's one part of it. The other part is really having a facility that's very technology forward. Part of the center, I manage 4 different very highly mediated classrooms and labs. We have a digital media suite, a recording studio, and we also have the Commons, which is behind me, which is just a big open collaborative tech-infused space. So we're not only teaching technology, but we're kind of living it as well. And it's this multifaceted approach, which really kind of helps bridge the gap between learning and technology.
Yeah, it's such a broad kind of question because it's so like widely applicable. And because of that how widely applicable it is, how do you think it can be beneficial for college students regardless of what their major is?
Yeah, absolutely. It's beneficial, I think, like you said, to anyone. My focus tends to be on the College of Ed and Human Services, so which in itself are 2 very different things.
Yeah.
So we try to work with our pre-service teachers who are in the College of Ed side and use technology that they're going to see one day and help inspire them to kind of figure out how they can use this one day.
Yeah,
and then on the other side, for the human services side, we're trying to incorporate technology in more of a professional setting. And that could be anything, how do I make a PowerPoint not look awful? How do we make something that's engaging? How do we create content? How do we use podcasting? How does that, what type of impact does that have? So we spend a lot of time on not only just using technology to teach, but talking about content creation and how, in a professional setting, regardless of what your area of specialty is, there's a big impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's kind of even like a revolution kind of going on in education at the moment, because just learning about politics through content that's been created about YouTube, throughout that type of stuff, politics, media creation, media analysis. There's so much amazing stuff out there.
Well, I mean, one of the things that we've been doing this year that is kind of we had the idea and we were like, let's throw it out there, see if it sticks. We've been talking to educators about using TikTok in their classroom.
Yeah.
And that kind of took off, which we were like, TikTok. And I mean, I'm going to be completely honest. I had to sit there with my team of student workers who completely taught me how to use TikTok the right way. And I've never felt older.
No, it is confusing, right? I remember having that moment too.
It's very confusing. It's very easy to just keep 2 hours of your life is gone because you're just scrolling through and you're like, what happened?
Hypnotic.
Yeah.
It is hypnotic. That's a very good way to say it. But we've been looking at TikTok and, how do we use this in a classroom? Because we're always trying to come up with creative and effective ways to reach our audience. And not just from a social marketing kind of perspective, but from an education perspective, we need to meet our students where they are. And TikTok has been a great resource to, the students are already there. So how do we gain their respect? How do we, make it an easier transition from their outside of traditional learning kind of mode? How do we bridge that gap? And TikTok's been a great way to kind of take advantage of that. In the past we've done things on Twitter, but right now Twitter is not as hot as TikTok is. So
TikTok
figuring out
is
ways to kind of
new one.
Yeah, it's figuring out what the trend is and how we can kind of respond to the trend, and that's something that's kind of fun. Um, that technology changes, so we need to respond to how technology changes and be ready for what's next.
Yeah, definitely. And just overall, how does the ADP what do you think the impact of the ADP Center has been on Montclair? Because obviously you've done this new thing with the whole TikTok and integrating social media into the education, which I still trying to wrap my head around. But just like overall, because it's such a versatile thing, like you and Jake both said.
It, yeah, I mean, I think impact wise, I hope I have as big of an impact as I possibly can. And my goal is always to work with and help as many students and faculty as I can, come in our space, learn about what we're doing, attend a workshop, come in and try out some new tech. So I hope my impact is pretty broad. We tend to have a bigger impact on students in classes that we partner with. In a semester, we can go from, we'll go into classes as well and run sessions that we've kind of co-created with the faculty. So if I'm going into, 20 classes a semester, plus we're doing another 15 to 20 workshops on our own, we have a pretty decent reach.
Yeah.
And then the commons in a year, we see, this is pre-pandemic, my numbers right now. But in a good year before the pandemic, we were seeing foot traffic of anywhere from 13 to 15,000 visits a year.
Wow.
And what's really interesting about those numbers is the students that find us tend to be juniors and seniors. So we've been really kind of turning our marketing efforts to underclassmen.
Yeah.
So, we're looking at these numbers and we're seeing that juniors and seniors are coming back and they're visiting us more than once. That means we're doing something right. But I want people in there earlier. I want students to find us, their freshman year, as soon as they could potentially be influenced by some of the work that we're doing and benefit from it.
And even get the full experience instead of in their latter 2 years.
And if you think about it, in 2 years, like what we're doing completely changes. I've been working at the center for 6 years, and I've been in various roles and different capacities. And our professional development lineup from when I first started to what we're doing now looks nothing alike. They look nothing alike.
I'm sure. Yeah, obviously, you can't you can never fully predict where the trends are going to go, especially with technology, because it just you can never imagine that. But I'm gonna ask you to try. Where do you think where do you kind of see the future for the ADP Center going?
Well, looking forward, we're trying to ramp up staffing. We're trying to be a little bit more creative in what we're doing, so our impact can grow. But I think in terms of what the next tech trends are, that's always fun to kind of spitball a little bit. I think VR and AR are going to have a really big influence. I think things shifted for a bit because pre-pandemic, things were leaning towards that. And then all of a sudden it was pivot, stop. We need to all learn how to teach on Zoom. So that was kind of it diverted for a minute. But I think we're going to hear more about that in the upcoming years. I'm sure we've all heard the word metaverse 7,000 times. So I think that's going to have a big influence on education, because students are going to start gravitating towards that. So how do we get ahead of that, and how do we not? We don't want to play catch up. And that's part of my job is to figure out what's coming next, so we're not behind, so that education is kind of meeting the students always where they currently are. Me learning how to use TikTok effectively, we're still in that TikTok kind of sphere of influence, right? That's still cool. So we're always trying to predict what's next, and I think AR and VR are going to be huge in the upcoming years. But it's interesting to see things that were hot button hot button kind of topics in the last few years. 3D printing. Do I think that's going anywhere? No. But do I think that's this year's or next year's buzzword for education? No. Which is interesting. So how do we kind of incorporate trends that maybe are not
the ones that are going to stick?
Yeah, and some trends do stick, and some have like kind of gone to the
Some are
wayside.
just there, and it's like cool.
And yeah, I mean, I can't say enough how like the pandemic has shifted the way students learn and how we as educators are
Yeah.
engaging our students. There's this really interesting kind of, I think, transition happening where I'm
Right.
sure you guys, even at Montclair, like some of your classes, there's more online components or there's a hybrid
Yeah.
component or, you know, things like that where we want that. That hasn't completely gone away. So figuring out how education is kind of responding to a younger generation's
Mm.
you know preference is really interesting, because even this year we run all of our professional development, we ran them in person last semester and they were in person. Our attendance wasn't great. This year, this semester we're running everything hybrid. Our attendance has skyrocketed past pre-pandemic levels.
Oh, wow.
So it's interesting to see, like, well, maybe that's our sweet spot.
Yeah.
That's what our audience wants right now. So I think education moving forward is going to have a big hybrid component.
Definitely.
Because
Yeah,
content, I
absolutely.
mean, you guys, this show, right? It lives on YouTube afterwards.
Yeah. It used to not, in as far as I remember.
Yeah, no, relatively recent. I feel like it must go back no more than like a year or two.
Yeah. So I mean, content and like creating content's not that difficult. We're doing things on Zoom. We're creating podcasts, we're creating videos, we're using Canva to make really professional looking graphics that aren't too hard to come by. So figuring out how to respond, and like content creation has gotten so simple, so we could create a lot of good content.
Right.
And I think the curve to create that content has really kind of flattened. So it'll be interesting to see what comes next.
Definitely. And you said you've been working there for quite a while now. So what does the ADP Center mean to you, and how did you get started working there?
Yeah, so my story is actually kind of funny. I started in the ADP Center during my undergrad at Montclair. So I was a student worker. I left for a little while. I was actually I was from the old broadcasting major before the School of Communication and Media was the thing. So I did my undergrad in broadcasting. I left for a little bit. I was working in the city at a production company, and then I got a phone call and they were like, "Hey, there's an opening. They're looking for an assistant director. We think you should apply." And at the time, I was like still trying to figure it out. Fresh out of college, I was like, what do I do now? What's my next move? I was freelancing a lot, so I was working, but it wasn't exactly, I think, what I wanted. So I went in for the interview. Luckily, they hired me. So I was the assistant director for a few years before transitioning into director. So I've seen the center from so many different angles. I've seen it from, the undergrad student. I've seen it as like the Montclair State employee. So it's been really interesting because I have so many different views of it. I think that makes me really uniquely qualified to lead the center and see, what should we be doing? What does work, and what do we think works, but really is like a disconnect. So we've been able to kind of respond and adapt pretty heavily the last few years. Even like the Commons, this room behind me, if you're on the radio, you can't see it, but if you're on Zoom, you can.
Yeah.
But this room, this was the old Curriculum Resource Center. It was a special collections library type space, where it was full of curriculum design books and old textbooks. So students that were, studying to be a 5th grade science teacher could come in and create lesson plans using a 5th grade science book. One of my first things as director, I said, "Ooh, this space is not heavily utilized. Students need a space to kind of come together and collaborate, work with their groups, make a lot of noise, make a mess, eat, do whatever." And we saw the demand was really shifting towards that. So when I became director 4 years ago, oh man, COVID time. It was
right. Yeah.
I came director right before COVID. And one of our biggest projects was kind of redoing this space. So the Commons is this open, kind of collaborative, space where we have Google Jamboards, we have kind of presentation pods, we have furniture that we can move around. It does get loud, it does get messy, and I think that's exactly how you learn.
Yeah.
When we try to set these like confined boundaries, I think that that prevents us from getting really creative.
Yeah. Sometimes that classroom setting can be kind of restrictive in that way.
Exactly. So we wanted to create a space that was, that was fun by nature. So when you walk in, we got it painted, which was not an easy task, but we got it painted a nice bright color. So things are neutral, and we have these beautiful big windows. So you walk in the space and you feel an energy. And that was important. So as soon as you walk in, our front desk staff is there to say, good morning. And we want to kind of set the tone. So it's not just physically being there, it's really experiencing what we have to offer. And that's really important to us. So seeing how it worked as a student, I didn't think it worked as well as it could. So now that I've had, now that it's my job and I've had the ability to change and tweak what we do, I think that's one of my biggest things. So what is the center to me? It's kind of my baby.
No.
It's my child, but we've had a lot of fun and been able to do a lot of creative things. And it really, I love coming to work, and I love being, in the role I am, because I do get to be creative. And I think so often we forget that we have that ability to, to learn. And I work in education. I hope, at no point in my career am I ever the expert, because even if I think I am, I should still be learning. And I think that's something really important as educators, that we don't kind of silo ourselves and we don't close ourselves down. My job, I get to work with people across the university, which is so much fun. I was recently doing something, we were trying to, like post-mortem after COVID things still. And we're like, oh, who did I work with during COVID? And I worked with at least one person from every college on campus at some point during the pandemic while we were doing remote learning. And I love that. I love that, my role lets me be creative and lets me be collaborative and break down those walls. And the center is really this like hub where everyone, regardless of what area of study, you specialize in, you can come to the center and get something from that. We're like a chameleon.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, and even like, I'm even thinking about like how important the space, like having that space for creativity and like where people can be kind of loud and have fun. Like I'm thinking about like the office we have here. It's like, I think everyone at the radio station is very aware of the need for that. And it's nice to know that like there are other places like that on campus. So what I'm kind of wondering is, how can students get involved at the ADP Center?
Yeah, thank you. So you could always check out adpcenter.org, which is just a redirect to the Montclair website. We update that webpage very frequently. We are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at ADP Center. Or you could stop by Monday through Thursday. We're open till 8:30 at night. Fridays we're open till 2 in the afternoon. We're on the first floor of University Hall, directly across from the courtyard. If you get lost, University Hall, the first floor is a big square. Just keep going around the square and you can't miss us.
Nice.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much. It was great talking to you.